Hello again and welcome to another Warlord Wednesday, the episode of the week where we talk about all things bolt action. In today's episode, we shall be continuing our unit review series, this time taking a look at one of the most iconic tanks for the armies of Great Britain. That's right, it's time for the Matilda 2, a medium tank that served with distinction throughout the whole of World War II and one which is beloved by many in the community. But how will this classic vehicle do in the game of bolt action? Will it translate its pedigree onto the tabletop? Well, there's only one way to find out. Let's hold the line at Dunkirk, take the fight to Rommel in Africa, and dive right into today's video. Now, in case you've not seen one of these videos before, what I like to do is start off with a unit overview. This is where I go through the points, stats, and weapons of the unit in question. We then move on to the good, the bad, and the ugly, where we consider the pros and cons of the Matilda 2. After that, we'll wrap the video up with a score out of 10 and some final thoughts. So let's begin with that unit overview. The Matilda 2 is an armoured vehicle. This means that it cannot be damaged by small arms fire. You're going to need something with a penetration value to damage it. What I mean by this is your rifles, LMGs, submachine guns, anything like that physically cannot hurt this vehicle. Even if you hit it 100 times, it simply won't do any damage. You need something more like an anti-tank rifle, or even better, a light, medium, or heavy anti-tank gun to really knock this thing out. It's also a single model unit. Unlike infantry squads that come with 5, 10, or maybe even 15 people in a single unit, this unit consists of a single tank. You can't take them in squads. The Matilda 2 is considered a medium tank. This gives it a damage value of 9+, which is pretty good. Medium tanks are very popular in bolt action. In fact, I would go as far to say they are the most common kind of vehicle you are likely to encounter or use in your games. This is because they're just nice. They're jack of all trades, master of none. They're not quite as cheap as light tanks, but they are significantly more durable, but they're not as expensive as heavy tanks. Most people find that in their pickup games or friendly matches, a good medium tank really is quite a nice asset to have at their disposal. As standard, the Matilda comes with a light anti-tank gun and a coaxial medium machine gun. But there's also another variant of the tank that we'll be talking about today, which can swap that light anti-tank gun out for a 3-inch light howitzer. In terms of its veterancy, this tank can come in either inexperienced, regular, or veteran. So you have the full spectrum of experience to draw upon. Of course, depending on what veterancy you go for will determine its points value. If you go for inexperienced, it will be 124 points, regular 155, or veteran 186. Now, you might be thinking, why not just go for the cheapest option? Well, your veterancy determines both your leadership, which means your ability to obey orders, and if you're going to be buying a tank, you kind of want it to do as it's told. It will also determine your ability to ignore pins that are thrown onto the unit. So when it comes to vehicles, if you are hit with a weapon that cannot penetrate your armor, if you are a veteran tank, you just ignore the pin marker for being hit. Your crew is experienced enough to know that that shot wasn't a threat to them. If you have a regular vehicle and you get hit by something that has a penetrative power but doesn't actually have the capability of damaging your armor, for example, a anti-tank rifle shooting you on the front, then on a 4+, your crew recognizes that that shot can hurt them and they ignore the pin. Inexperienced tanks always take the pin. They haven't got the chops to understand that that round couldn't actually hurt them, and they're just getting freaked out by the large prang they heard off the side of the hull. So that covers the unit overview, but why don't we lift up the rock and have a good look underneath? Let's get into the deep dive. So let's begin this segment with the positives. What makes the Matilda 2 a good vehicle? To start off, it has one of the most important things going for it. It is very rule of cool. It's a classic. It's iconic. It is quintessentially British. And that last one is very important to consider, Because when getting into bolt action on the Allied side, whether you are American, British, or Soviet, it's very easy to find yourself with a Sherman or some other Lend-Lease vehicle. But it's very nice to just have a unit which is part of your faction. And the Matilda 2 is very much a British tank. It's big, it's boxy, it's more armoured than it should be for a tank of its time, and it's got no sloped armour whatsoever. It's just a big, square beast, and it just feels right having one in your British army. It's also got a lot of history and pedigree behind it, which makes it a unit to be proud of. During the fall of France, Matilda 2s were one of the few Allied vehicles that the Germans genuinely feared and were actually able to stop the Blitzkrieg, even if it was just for a short time. And when you go over to North Africa and the 8th Army, the Matilda 2 was one of the vehicles that was doing the bulk of the heavy lifting and made up a large number of the Allied armoured fleet. It was a very common vehicle throughout British armies. It was beloved by its crews, and as a result, you can pop one in your force and it will feel right at home. Unlike some units in bolt action which have rules because technically they existed, but rarely they ever saw the battlefield. You can think of some of the late war Japanese units like the Ho-Ro, which are very popular in game, but realistically never saw any combat. The Matilda 2 is not like that. It saw action all over the world, and you can use it in early war, mid-war, and even late war. Although by the late war, the Matilda 2 was showing its age, and it didn't really see a lot of frontline action, having been supplanted by things like Shermans and Cromwells and also Churchills. But it was still used by a lot of second line and reserve units, and it could be pushed into combat if things were going a bit sticky. However, moving away from its cool factor and its historical lore, the Matilda 2 does have a few positive points going for it. Firstly, it's quite cheap. A medium tank for 155 points is almost unheard of. Most of the time, you're looking at spending 175 for one with a howitzer, or 200 plus points for a vehicle with some kind of anti-tank gun. Even a Sherman, an early war one with the thin sides and the catching fire, is going to cost you more than a Matilda 2. In fact, when we compare it to its counterpart in the German army for the time that you're most likely to field the Matilda in, which is sort of early war, mid-war, the Panzer III comes in at 155 points, and yet it's only a light tank. Not only is this thing an absolute bargain, but you're also getting a lot of tank for your money. This thing is a medium vehicle, and especially in the early war, that is a big deal. The fact that the British start off the game with easy access to a very common and non-experimental medium tank with few downsides to things like thin sides or sets fire is, quite frankly, astounding. Most of the factions of the time are going to be running around with light vehicles, at best maybe a light tank or tankette, something that's running around with armor 7+ or 8+. And much of the anti-tank work is going to be done by anti-tank rifles and also light AT. Frankly, that just isn't enough. An anti-tank rifle cannot penetrate a Matilda 2's front armor, not even glance it, even if it's within half range. And at long range, even if it's shooting on the side of the vehicle, again, it can't damage it. Your anti-tank rifle needs to get up close and personal and hit the Matilda 2 on the side armor in order to be able to merely glance it. And as for your light anti-tank guns, well, if you're shooting at the Matilda 2 from a long distance, you need a 3+ to glance the vehicle on the front armor, and only if you get within 24 inches and get pretty damn close are you going to be able to full-blown penetrate it with a frontal shot from a light AT. Now, all of this sounds pretty bloody fantastic, and you might have an image in your head of your Matilda 2 gloriously charging across the open desert, smashing all before it. But unfortunately, the moment we get out of the early war and we enter even the beginning of the mid-war, the Matilda 2 starts going downhill pretty quickly. For example, that light Panzer III we mentioned earlier pretty quickly ends up with a medium AT gun. And this allows it to catch up and maybe even exceed the Matilda 2 pretty quickly. When you think about it, the Matilda 2 will have to potentially spend a turn out of range of the Panzer III, but with that medium AT gun, the Panzer III can start putting holes through Matildas from 60 inches away. That means the Matilda's going to have to move to get into range. That starts stacking on a -1 to hit modifier onto the Matilda. So not only is it going to have less penetrative power, it's also going to be less accurate against even the most slightly upgunned Panzer III. And the moment that Panzer III becomes a medium tank with a medium AT gun, which is pretty much the quintessential mid-war Panzer III, the Matilda just doesn't even have a chance. It's going to get outranged, outpenetrated, and its one advantage, which is it's kind of tough, suddenly doesn't even count for anything anymore. On top of this, the Matilda is slow. That means it only moves 6 inches a turn when it advances and 12 inches when it runs. So if you are trying to move and shoot with this thing, run and gun, against an enemy Panzer III that you're in a tank duel with, you're going to find yourself really struggling to actually close that distance. And there's nothing really stopping that Panzer III from kiting you and stopping you from ever getting in your optimum range. Essentially, the Matilda 2 is a bully unit. It can punch down on lighter vehicles than itself, but the moment its contemporaries start getting upgunned and we get into that mid-war period, it just struggles. And the realm of tank dueling and armored warfare really start becoming off limit for this thing. So what's the solution? For many vehicles, they can become Dakar tanks instead, because what you got to realize is this conundrum that we're facing is not just limited to the Matilda 2. As an allied player, you might find yourself in this position quite often. Think about it. If you get to the late war and you're bringing your Cromwell tank, but the German player brings a Panzer IV, which is a medium tank with a heavy AT gun, or a Tiger tank, you're going to find yourself in exactly the same situation. However, the Cromwell has 2 medium machine guns, one coaxial and one in the hull. And so rather than firing its main gun, it can fire the coaxial machine gun in addition to the hull one. This gives it quite a lot of Dakar and allows it to chuck pins around and gun down any inexperienced or exposed infantry. Sadly, the Matilda can't do Dakar tank duties either, because it only has 1 medium machine gun and it's a coaxial one. So you have to choose to fire it or the main gun. That's only 5 medium machine gun shots. And 155 points for a medium tank that can bully other vehicles is great, but 155 points for the same damage output as a MMG team, that ain't great at all. So does that mean that the Matilda 2 is useless outside of early war? Fortunately not. For there is another. There is a separate variant that we mentioned at the beginning of the video. You can take the Matilda 2 CS, and this comes with a light howitzer. Frankly, the Matilda CS saved this whole thing, and it gives the tank the ability to play right through into the late war, because HE, high explosives, are always viable. In fact, they're one of the most powerful mechanics in bolt action, and anything that allows you to get HE onto the board cheaply is a viable commodity. Between the Matilda CS, a light howitzer, and a medium mortar, for a pretty low price point, you could have 3 sources of high explosives in your army. That's going to throw around a lot of pins, and you've still got plenty of anti-tank options in the way of Piats and other infantry teams like flamethrowers. Okay, with all that said, now let's move on to the final score and closing thoughts. I'm going to give the regular Matilda 2 a 5 out of 10. I know that seems like a low score, but honestly, outside of early war, it really struggles. And you're going to find yourself wishing you brought another vehicle. But the Matilda CS absolutely saves it. and is a brilliant unit, which I think can be used into the late war, simply due to the fact it allows you to get more HE into the list without breaking the bank. I'm going to give that version a 7 out of 10, and so overall an average score of 6. At the end of the day, the Matilda is a classic British tank that looks amazing on the battlefield. It's really, really cool, but it is kind of held back by its lackluster loadout. Fortunately, there is at least that HE profile in the back pocket that allows you to get some use out of it, and I would probably say that it's best used in that infantry support role. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Do you like the Matilda 2? How do you rate its rules? And if you don't like it, what other vehicle would you take instead? I hope you all enjoyed today's video. If you have, make sure you smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. If you found today's video particularly informative and enjoyable, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon. One of the big perks you get for supporting the channel is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, which has a small yet active and growing bolt action sub-community within it. And if you found today's video particularly enjoyable or informative, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon. By supporting the channel, you'll be helping me create content, but at the same time, you will also unlock a whole host of perks for you to enjoy, the biggest of which is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,000 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for discussing tactics, hobbying, painting, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. And I just want to take a moment to say a big thank you to all of the latest channel members. So thank you to Default Username, Edwin J, Jack Finley, Duke Ronald, Billy, Rick Music, Nick Berry, Kevin Nelson, Sam Zarski, Necker Loves Cake, Alex Rodriguez, Robin Burt, Strix, Johnny 5, Alexander Berg, Ben Hogan, Stephen, Admiral Galactica, Bass Browser, Neuromancer, Duca 15, Milo Moran, Uncle Buck, Nate, Bryson Lay, Toby K, Greg Heist, Christian E, Mass Produce Me, Lowly Strategos, Victor Von Snazdacker, Richard Eric Roth, Brandon Hutchings, Nathaniel Duncan, Midash Guy, Dadum, Hot Cup of Joe, Alexandra Brunn, Wilson Marquis, Monsoir, Geezer, Duffsnick, Julian Calero, James Riddle, Radioactive Bear, Ross Shaw, Tech 910, Rob Gailey, 40 Hitter, DB, Anders Morkberg, Colvia, Garin Fick, Razor 667, Miguel Perez, Peter Cronin, HP MV 110, Eric McCombs, Iku Turso, An Innocent, Joe, Alex Trups, Aid K, Mr. Baxter, Old Goat 1776, Callum McCaig, Unlisted Uniform, Morgan Rudolph, Alan Chapman, Tensler, and Couch Potato. I also want to do a big shout to the latest Patreons as well. So thank you to Jordan Freeman 94, Amy DeSweet, Aegis, Jamin Bales, Historicrane, James Lowry, Ken Starr, Reef Marley, Hannah B888, Jackson Ashworth, Meter Smithman, Kelly and Chris Malink, Plastic Fork, Mike Galvin, and Miss Rogue Merc. And last, but certainly not least, I want to say a personal, special, heartfelt thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a massive thank you to Alan Blunt III, Amy DeSweet, Bon Bon Vert, Ken Starr, Mark Panconi, Ross Miller, Sawfish Trombone, John Stubbs, Diesel Fox, and August Varney. Thank you guys. Your ongoing and incredibly generous support makes a huge difference and is a big part of how I'm able to do Mordian Glory full time. I hope you all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.